We are diving deep today, and we're really trying to move past the daily headlines, the tactical checklists. Our goal is to synthesize the foundational structures of truly intelligent decision-making, these mental models, and then immediately apply them to the high-stakes world of technology and startups and, well, massive corporate power.
That's right. Our mission for you, the listener, is really to jump those mental boundaries. Whether you're analyzing a new market or just trying to figure out why a policy decision failed, or even planning your own career, we've pulled insights from 3 really different zones. Foundational texts on these cognitive tools, notes on high-growth startup strategy.
That's the Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley stuff. Yeah.
Exactly that. And then we've got the fine print reality of digital life, using Google's terms of service as an example. We're trying to extract the big idea so you can gain that knowledge quickly but also thoroughly.
Okay, so let's start with those mental models.
All right.
The fundamental tools. The sources start simple with a concept like velocity.
It's not enough to be fast. Speed without direction is, well, it's useless. It has to be speed and direction.
And if you think about that in a startup context, you can be executing incredibly quickly. But if you're running toward a dead-end market, that speed just gets you to failure faster.
So efficiency only matters if you're pointed the right way.
Precisely.
Then there's reciprocity. This one's powerful. It's not just, trading favors.
No, it's a deep psychological thing. The idea is that if you take the initiative, if you offer value first and act positively, you create a kind of social debt. And the world people, organizations, they'll often do the heavy lifting for you in return. It's almost unconscious. Reputation, social trust.
You become an attractor.
You become an attractor.
Yeah.
And that connects directly to another one, relativity, which forces you to look at that whole ecosystem from a completely different angle. It exposes your blind spots. You might think your product is superior, but what if you look at it through the eyes of a customer who only cares about cost?
Okay. Suddenly you see all this new information.
Right. And as someone who has seen things fall apart a few times, my personal favorite is margin of safety.
A healthy dose of realism.
It's just that brutal reminder that almost nothing goes exactly to plan. You have to build in buffers, time, capital, even just cognitive slack. It's what keeps you from getting wiped out when the inevitable shock hits.
And those foundational checks, they lead right into playing the long game, which requires second-order thinking. This is the difference between a choice that feels good right now, the first-order effect, and forcing yourself to think about the long-term implications, the unintended consequences.
So am I solving today's problem just to create 10 bigger ones tomorrow?
That's the question. You have to focus on the entire journey, not just the next step.
But that journey is always.
Yeah.
It's always foggy. How do you make decisions without perfect information?
Well, you have to rely on probabilistic thinking. It's the art of navigating that uncertainty without getting paralyzed. You start by identifying the few factors that really drive the system. You calculate the rough odds of different outcomes, you check your assumptions rigorously, and then you decide.
You don't try to build some perfect complex theory.
No, the danger is exactly that. You build the theory so complex, demanding certainty, that it just collapses under its own weight. Simple probability meets complex paralysis every time.
Speaking of paralysis, maybe frustration, we need a tool for that too. Which brings us to Hanlon's razor. Assume incompetence, not malice.
It's a huge emotional and tactical energy saver. It really is. When something goes wrong, our first instinct is to think someone is actively working against us. Hanlon's razor just clips that. The overwhelming majority of the time, the failure is due to simple human stuff. Incomplete information, mistakes, short-term priorities, or just plain old stupidity.
But isn't there a risk there? That you might let, a real bad actor off the hook? How do you tell the difference between incompetence and a genuinely clever, malicious competitor?
That's the subtlety of it. You don't assume malice doesn't exist. You just assume it's statistically the rarest explanation. You start with incompetence because it's the most likely path. If you investigate and find a deliberate, coordinated effort to deceive, well, then you adjust your model. But most internal project failures, such as people trying to get things done quickly and messing up, not some sinister plot.
Okay, that makes sense. It saves you from chasing ghosts. Now, sometimes the world itself just resists, which is where the models of friction and viscosity come in.
Right. These are metaphors for resistance, organizational tension, technical debt, people with different goals creating conflict.
And when you hit that resistance, the instinct is just to push harder, apply more force.
But the sources suggest that's often the wrong move, or at least not the most effective one. Reducing the friction, making the path easier, streamlining the process process, aligning goals, that's often a far more effective use of your energy. Of course, if you can reduce the resistance and apply more force, that's when you get breakthrough velocity.
Which sort of zooms us out to the final big model here.
Yeah.
The ecosystem view. Nothing exists in isolation.
Every startup, every product, it's all in this delicate balance of competition and cooperation. You can't just analyze your main competitor. You have to see how their actions, or even the actions of their partners, create ripples that will eventually hit you.
That ecosystem view is a perfect transition, actually. Let's talk about progress itself, which is the heart of tech strategy. The sources break it into two flavors, horizontal versus vertical.
Right, and this is basically the difference between copying and creating, between going from 1 to n versus 0 to 1.
So horizontal, or extensive progress, is replication. It's taking a successful model, like a factory, and just scaling it globally. It's globalization, making every place look a little more like the most successful place.
But the real breakthroughs, the truly revolutionary stuff, that's vertical or intensive progress, that's technology, going from 0 to 1, inventing the microchip or the internet, doing something totally new. And the sources really push on this idea that society focuses way too much on the extensive and doesn't generate enough of that original 0 to 1 value.
And if you're just focused on maintaining the status quo, you're in trouble. You face selection pressure. Creative destruction is real. The sources say standing still is the quickest path to extinction.
Absolutely. Victory, whether it's for you personally or for your company, depends entirely on continuously investing your skills and your knowledge.
This brings us to a huge trap, I think. This conflation of difficulty and value. We assume if something is hard, it must be valuable.
We all fall for it. The amount of effort we put in becomes a proxy for the importance of the outcome. Intense competition makes things brutally hard. You're beating heads with 10,000 other smart people, and that difficulty starts to feel like value. But you might be fighting fierce battles where the stakes are fundamentally tiny. You're just wasting your energy. The most competitive markets are often the worst places to be.
So if that intense competition is a bad signal, what's the solution? The sources say something pretty dramatic. Shift your whole trajectory towards the monopoly. That sounds good.
Well, the goal is to escape competition that just destroys value. A monopoly in this context just means you're the only one providing a unique, critical solution. You've created a new category so successfully that your value isn't immediately competed away. It's the natural result of that 0 to 1 progress. You aren't fighting for 1% of an existing industry. You're capturing 100% of a brand new one.
And to create that new frontier, you have to be smart about how you show up. The sources caution against being too disruptive.
Yeah, that's the tactical nuance. The disruptive tech story is, it's often overplayed. Look at Napster. It was disruptive, sure, but it broke too many rules, it created way too much legal and cultural heat, and it couldn't survive. The infrastructure wasn't ready. It's much smarter to find a new frontier where the rules are still being written than to just try and dismantle a highly defended existing industry.
That aggressive 0 to 1 focus leads us straight into the economic realities, the brutal math of the power law and venture capital.
This is one of the most unintuitive things, I think. It forces VCs into this incredibly high-risk mindset. You can forget everything you know about a diversified portfolio. A VC fund's returns are dictated by a power law distribution. A tiny number of investments generate almost all the profit.
The math is just crazy. Can you give us an example to ground that?
Sure. Let's say a VC firm has a $100 million fund. They invest in 20 companies. That fund needs to return, $300 or $400 million to be a success. The rule of thumb is that the single best investment has to be worth more than the entire rest of the portfolio combined.
Wow, sometimes even more than the entire fund itself. If your best bet is only a 3 times return, the fund fails.
So if that one company doesn't become a unicorn, a multi-billion-dollar hit, the entire portfolio is basically a wash for investors.
Precisely. And that puts massive pressure on VCs to find these extreme outliers. It's why they can't just be passive capital. Just cutting a check is a commodity.
Yeah.
To survive, they have to provide differentiated help. Their network, their advice, aggressive recruiting, anything to try and force those outlier returns.
And that desperation for the home run puts huge pressure on timing. The paddling analogy. You have to catch the right wave.
And it's better to err on the side of paddling out when there's no wave yet than paddling too late and missing it. Social networking is yesterday's wave, right? But timing is so hard, especially in deep tech like biotech or AI. Founders are always caught in this tension between exponential hope and asymptotic reality.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. What's the difference there? Exponential hope is the dream. Progress starts slow, and then it suddenly explodes upwards, doubling every year. Founders live on that promise. But asymptotic reality is what usually happens. The progress curve flattens out. Think of self-driving cars. A decade ago, we had massive exponential hope. But the reality is that final 1% of the problem is so hard that the curve has become asymptotic. It gets closer and closer to perfection, but never quite reaches it. The key question is knowing if now is the right time before that asymptote hits.
Which makes that early team absolutely critical. And we have some fascinating stories from the sources on this, specifically from PayPal. They came late to the dot-com boom and were worried about hiring, quote, sketchy people. So they did something radical. They just hired their friends.
It was a conscious choice for cohesion. They needed a small group who trusted each other implicitly. There's that example of the candidate who rejected, aced the engineering test. But they found out he liked to play hoops. Yeah, no one in the core group would ever use that word. They decided he just wouldn't fit the hyper-focused sort of anti-establishment culture. It sounds brutal, but it shows that extreme cultural filtering.
And that bias extends to other things, too. The notes mentioned a surprisingly good heuristic, the anti-fashion bias. Great engineers often don't wear designer jeans.
It's a quick filter for substance over surface. They're looking for people focused purely on solving hard problems, not on signaling status. And that bias is essential when you're competing against giants like Google, who have this oil derrick spitting out $30 billion a year in search revenue. You can't win with money.
So how do you pull top talent away from a six-figure salary in a cubicle at Google?
You have to articulate a vision that cuts through the cynicism. The message has to be, at the giant company, you are a cog, one of 10,000. But with us, you are an instrumental piece of something entirely new and important. You have to make that 1% chance of building a future more exciting than the guaranteed cash.
And once you have that team, you need growth. Which brings us to the mechanics of viral growth.
The viral coefficient has to be greater than 1 for it to be exponential. And the PayPal story is the perfect example. They build in cash incentives. They literally paid people to join and refer others. That tactic hit a 7% daily viral growth rate. Think about that. They were doubling their user base every 10 days. That's the kind of speed that builds a monopoly.
We've talked about building a company, but let's shift to the reality of living under the giants. We looked at the fine print, specifically Google's terms of service, and it reveals this massive power imbalance.
What really stands out is the unilateral control. Google can suspend or delete your account for reasons that are both specific, like a material breach, and also incredibly broad. They can terminate your account if they reasonably believe your conduct causes harm or liability to, well, anyone, another user, third party, or Google itself.
And harm is defined so broadly. Hacking, phishing, harassing, spamming, scraping content. It covers a huge amount of online behavior.
But here's the key legal nuance for the listener, the waiver clause. If you commit a breach and Google doesn't act immediately, maybe they're busy, they don't see it, they are explicitly not giving up their right to act in the future.
They hold that leverage over you forever.
Indefinitely. You are always subject to their future discretion.
That permanent corporate leverage brings us to our final point, the massive shift in the user-generated content market, which is now, of course, being shaped by scalable AI.
The advice to brands is pretty clear. Stop acting like companies and start acting like creators. You need a human face. For individual creators, the stakes are rising fast. The sources say that because AI can replicate most generalized UGC articles, simple videos, the vast majority of creators now need leverage.
And how do they get that leverage?
By becoming the face of a company or partnering with the brand. The analysis suggests only about 10% of creators are so unique in their insight or personality that AI can't replicate them. Not yet, anyway. If you aren't in that top 10%, you need the support, the network, the financial backing of a brand to thrive. It's a strategy that loops right back to those lessons about the power law and needing differentiated help to win.
So this deep dive has taken us from, well, the philosophical bedrock of mental models, like Hanlon's razor margin of safety, straight through to the aggressive pursuit of monopoly, the brutal math of the power law, and the practical reality of living under these corporate digital contracts. The value, I think, as always, is in making the connections between these seemingly separate disciplines.
Absolutely. The sources really suggest that trying to analyze all this complexity alone is a fool's errand. You miss things. Leveraging a network of smart people, or at least the synthesized knowledge of fields like it's not optional. It's fundamental to adaptation.
So let's end with a thought that builds on that idea of adaptation. We discussed how evolution itself relies on imperfect replication. Errors creep in, mutations occur, and that variation is what prevents stagnation. So if standing still is the quickest path to extinction, my question for you is this: what imperfections or necessary errors should you actively introduce into your own highly optimized, highly structured routines? Not mistakes from sloppiness, but deliberate deviations. What errors do you need to ensure you're continuously adapting and avoiding that safe, but ultimately terminal path of perfect replication? Something to chew on until our next deep dive.